communication and outreach team at SOC. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Professor Priya Doshi. And Priya is a professor here at SOC in strategic communications, and she is also AU's inclusion officer at SOC. So I will turn it over to Priya for what's going to be a great evening of conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. I'm so delighted to be here. Good evening, everybody. I am Professor Priya Doshi, and as Matt indicated, I am also faculty. I'm faculty here teaching in the Public Communication Division, teach a number of courses, both online and face-to-face normally when we're not in a COVID period. And I'm also SOC's Inclusion Officer, which means that I lead SOC's efforts related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In addition to that, I coordinate with the university on SOC's work in that regard as well. And so I'm really excited to be here with some of our esteemed alumni talking tonight about diversity and navigating diversity and inclusion in the communication industry. So I wanted to welcome our panelists. Tonight we have Jenna Caldwell. Jenna, if you just want to raise your hand and say hello to everybody. Jenna is a production associate for Time's weekly digital talk show, TIME100 Talks. She graduated from SOC in from SIS in 2019, but she was also editor of the Black Print while she was here. And currently she is working with Time's Time100. Lauren Lumpkin is a double SOC graduate. She graduated undergrad with a degree in public relations and strategic comms, and then did her master's in journalism. And she's currently at the Washington Post, where she is the higher education reporter. Next, we have Kex Rhodes. Kex is a Emmy-nominated writer, producer, and director of films and branded content for multiscreen platforms. She graduated from AU in, I believe it was 2014, is that right? 2014, with a degree in film and media arts, and has worked on a number of well-known television television broadcasts like NBC4, Comcast, the CW network, and for the American Bar Association and BBC Studios. Welcome, Kex. And then last but not least, we have Kevin Walker. And Kevin graduated from AU with his master's in strategic communication in 2016. And he is a corporate communications and public relations specialist at GEICO, though he just informed us that he is excitedly taking on a new role at a different company very soon. So congratulations, Kevin. And prior to working with GEICO, Kevin worked as communications assistant for the Center on Global Policy Solutions, which is a Washington, D.C. think tank based on social inequality. And he also had a whole career prior to coming to the world of PR as a journalist and an editor working for the Winston-Salem Chronicle. So welcome, Kevin. So thank you all for being here. I'm really, again, very happy that you could make it and took time out of your busy schedules to be here. So we have a range of great questions for you, and I definitely want to invite audience questions as well in the Q&A. But let me just begin with a whopper of a question, and we'll just kind of pitch it out to you guys and see who wants to take this on. So we're all wondering in this age of racial reckoning, which the country is going through, what distinguishes, in your minds, true equity from just diversity in the media? And how have you seen this play out in your careers?
Yeah, that's a big one. We're all like, who's gonna talk first? I'll take my stab at it and hopefully someone can correct me. I don't know, when I think of diversity, I think of numbers. You just in terms of if you're looking at a group of people, and I don't know if there's a quota in mind, but you know, a diverse group of people, you see people representing different backgrounds and maybe different lived experiences. And I think that's great, but as we know, and as we see in newsrooms and different companies, organizations, just because you have a diverse group of people at universities, just because you have a diverse group of people doesn't mean that they all have the same access and the same opportunities. And so that's when equity comes in, when everyone actually does have equal opportunities and have equal access, and I think the things that make a diverse group, diverse races and ages and sexualities, when those are when those lived experiences are useful, and I think they are useful. That's kind of what diversity should be, after everyone kind of using their lived experiences as a strength. And that's what equity is, when people aren't having to kind of disguise those parts of their identities, when those parts of their identities can be uplifted, and they actually do, and they actually kind of contribute to the organization in a really meaningful way. I hope I explained that well. I think that's what equity is, and I've seen kind of both sides of that, and I think we're kind of getting closer to equity. I don't think we're as close as I would like, or as close as a lot of people would like, but I think that, at least in my experience, the editors I work with, it is something on their minds at least, and that is really reassuring to me.
That's great to hear. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that? Jenna, I just saw you unmute, so I'm assuming you do.
Yes, I thought that was a great answer. And just to add on, I think it's really important to, you can start to really understand the division between diversity and equity if you look at a particular company. So it might be great that a company might be like 30% journalists, producers, reporters of color, but once you start to look at those management positions and kind of see who's in power, and once you begin to see that at the higher you go, the fewer people of color, the fewer people of different backgrounds are at the top, then you kind of start to look at sort of what is and what isn't truly equitable. So you might be in the room, but you're not at the table, and you're not necessarily making decisions, but instead being given orders. And I think that's a really important thing to look at here as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's go to more of a personalized question. So that was kind of a broad question. So let's talk a little bit about some of your personal experiences. Have there been, let's see, let me go down to, have there been any times in which you have felt like you were encountering barriers personally in terms of your career or your professional growth? And how did you overcome those barriers?
Yeah, I'll touch on that. So yeah, being in the film and television and advertising industry, there's a lot of, you see a lot of the majority is, a lot of it is not the minority. So there's a lot of times that I've encountered a lot of microaggressions, different situations, and it could be very blatant, but it could also be like microaggressions, excuse me. My throat, I just need to take some water here. Sorry, excuse me. Excuse me there, I just had a little things going on in my throat. So yeah, I've definitely encountered a lot of microaggressions in the industry, and being a woman of color, a way to navigate that is to present diverse options to the table when those opportunities arise, and to always voice and make sure that your voice is heard, essentially. So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Sure, no problem. No, I was just asking around how you navigate those barriers when you encounter them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a way that I've navigated that is to present these different diverse options, whenever I do encounter those barriers. So for example, in the advertising world, excuse me, in the advertising world, when working with different clients or companies and organizations, if there's a talent that has to be casted, for example, the actors, I like to present different diverse options. Being someone who is of a diverse background, being half African American, half Japanese, it's definitely something I'm very much wanting to represent in the work that I do. So, presenting these options to the client, at times there have been situations where it's not like the client or the organization is outwardly like, oh, we don't want diversity in our commercials or our products, but a way that is indicated is they would provide another set of options that does not consist of diversity. So, of course, another way to go around that barrier is to just if you have other opportunities on that project to hire diverse voices, I just tried to always implement that in the work. So yeah, one way to overcome those barriers is to just ensure I provide those options to continue to get those voices out there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's so important because you have to have a voice at the table, that's encouraging a more critical look at what kind of representation is happening. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that question around times where you've encountered obstacles or barriers and how you have overcome them?
Sure, I'll talk about that. And, maybe some of you can relate. I don't know sometimes the perceived barrier, sometimes, being an African-American man, 6'3", 245 pounds, sometimes, I wonder, how I come off in the employment world, that when I'm interviewing with people or talking to people who most of the time don't look like me. And, I think that's something I struggled with, early in my career. I'm a bit too long in the tooth now to really give that much weight, but I think that's always in the back of your mind when you don't, look like the majority, whether you're going to be viewed in a certain way, whether the perception of you, is going to be you're too aggressive, you're too this, and you're too that. And, how I dealt with it, like I said, these were thoughts I had, much earlier in my career, but I just came to the realization that, I'm willing to help educate people and do all of this, but ultimately you just have to be who you are. And hopefully, it is 2021. Hopefully, people can meet you where you are, because, trying to be something or someone you are not, in an interview or whatnot, when the truth is bound to come out if you start working for someone, just doesn't work. So that's just my take on my experience.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Yeah, and I know that you've got a long career history because I know that you had a whole career prior to coming and doing your master's with us at AU. Have you noticed any changes? I'd be curious from the time you started in your career to now in terms of how people are. What the environment's really like for people of color. Has it gotten any better from the beginning of your career until this point? That would be a really interesting thing to understand.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think so. When I started in journalism, I spent the most of my career in the Black press. I was at a Black-owned newspaper. So, leaving that environment where, I had a Black publisher and a Black owner, and kind of going to corporate America, was sort of like, ooh, this is different. But, I think so. I think, from the time when I was in undergrad, at least until now, I think people are more willing to acknowledge, that there's an issue, to acknowledge that, sometimes, well, all the time, it matters who's at the table and who's making the decisions. So I definitely think that is a huge change from, say, 20 years ago. But what's still an issue, and I think this takes us back to your first question, is, I think people are doing okay on diversity for the most part. People, they're 12 or so percent of African Americans in the country. So, I think companies or nonprofits, and they have 12% African Americans among their associates or employees, they think they're doing good, but the real part is making sure that they aren't, just the ones, at the bottom of the corporate ladder, but they're, in management, they're on the board of directors, they're, given the same opportunities as anyone else to advance themselves. So I think in that area, we still have a lot more work to do. But I think more people are acknowledging that it's a problem, and it's an area we all need to work on.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back out broad now. So again, sort of looking at the industry as a whole. So why is it important to promote representation in the media, and how can the media work to foster a better sense of belonging for all? And how can the industry really improve upon this? So again, why does representation matter? What can the media do to get better at this and fostering a sense of belonging? And what are the particular areas you think that the media really has work to do in that regard?
I can start. I think representation is really important because I'll talk about like the news just because that's what my life is about, and what my experience is. When you are working at a publication, I work at the Post, for example, like our audience is broad, and there's all types of people reading the Post. And if the people who are making decisions, who are writing stories, who are profiled in these stories and who are part of these stories, if they are all white, for example, you are totally alienating so many other groups of people who deserve to see themselves represented in the media. And I think I think the media is kind of, like I said, becoming more diverse. You have more diverse newsrooms, and even in management positions, we're starting to see more editors and more managing editors of color. But I think that we do have a lot more room to grow, especially when it comes to the way certain people are represented in the media. For example, you have some organizations now, I'm losing some come to mind, but I'm kind of losing the names of them, but some kind of smaller local newspapers are starting to do this thing where they stop publishing photos with mugshots because, often if there's a crime story, and they publish along with the crime story, there's a mugshot. A lot of the times it's a Black man, and there's lots of other reasons. There's lots of reasons why that's the case that I don't know if we have time to go into, but over time, of course, you start to match a story with an image, crime, Black people, and that is kind of the stereotype that has existed for a very long time. And I think things like that are positive. If you're writing a story about a carjacking or something, you don't necessarily need, and the person has been arrested, I don't think a service is really done by publishing that person's mugshot. And I think that is kind of a good way that we are moving as an industry in terms of breaking down stereotypes and really looking at the way that we contribute to stereotypes. But I mean, that's just one example. I think there's a lot of other things that we need to do. Just really being more inclusive about our reporting, and not relying on stereotypes, not just, doing a story about, I kind of see these stories that are happening a lot now about vaccines, the coronavirus vaccines, and some of the complications with getting people of color, number one, on board to take the vaccines, but also getting the vaccine in those communities. And I've seen a lot of those stories, but I also want us to move past that. Okay, like Black people are distrusting of the medical industry. Like, yes, we get that. I think that's an important story to be told, but I hope that turns into longer coverage of Black health and Black health disparities, not just talking about it when it's an issue right now, and because it is important, but that is long lasting. And I think that's kind of the difference. That's where I think we should be going, when the coverage of different communities is part of our everyday coverage, not just a story here or there.
That's an excellent point, Lauren, because I think that you're really making notice of that difference between dealing with an issue that is right now currently the biggest issue, right, which is COVID in everybody's minds, versus something that's just a chronic situation, which is really what you're talking about here in terms of issues that affect communities of color and have for a very long time and have just been invisible. So that's a really great perspective on the news. What about a perspective in terms of film or broadcast? I'd love to hear from Jenna or Kex on that one regarding representation in the media.
Yeah, so I can touch on the film industry. So first of all, I think it's important to promote representation in the media because I think media is so powerful. I just real quick will touch on the very first time that I was really exposed to learning about and understanding media essentially. So I still remember the first class that I ever had at AU SOC was understanding media with Scott Talon, who I still keep in touch with today. And that's where I really discovered it's just such a powerful tool. Touching on the film industry, for many, many years, just on the screen, there hasn't been a lot of representation from diverse backgrounds. Of course, in recent years, we have seen a lot of that start to shift and the conversations have been happening. I think that, part of that is because within the mainstream film industry, there's been a lot of, it's been very white male dominated. And I'm not knocking on white males. I have colleagues who are white males, of course, but the fact is that that's how it has been. And so now I think we're moving towards more people of color or diverse backgrounds are being in these positions to be able to, have more diverse representation on the screen. There's also the talk behind the scenes, which I kind of fall in, and that still, I think, has some work to be done. But I definitely think that it's moving in that direction a lot more than it has in previous years. And it's not only because people from diverse backgrounds are now in those positions, but also because, the majority are standing alongside diverse backgrounds in solidarity and making sure that this representation is being portrayed on camera and behind the scenes. So yeah, I definitely think that it has been improving. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. It's definitely something that's a mission of mine in the film industry. So yeah, so media is just a powerful tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a great point, much like the point around you don't just want people of color in the ranks, you want them in the management. You don't just want them in front of the camera, you want them telling the stories, right? Creating the content. So I think it's both of that. Let me pull some questions out of the chat because I see that we've got some questions there. So Mackenzie Galloway asks, does anyone have advice for a journalist who is transitioning to film? Have any of you been in that position, or do you know of people who have?
Okay, I think if this is Mackenzie that reached out to me, hey, I think you reached out to me on social media recently, but to answer your question, I think the world of journalism and the world of film essentially shares this common thing of storytelling. And I think, I'm not sure what exactly you're seeking to transition into within film, but I think the advice that I can give you is to, continue to just tell stories, no matter what platform of media that you decide to tell it on. I'm trying to think if I know anyone who has transitioned from journalism to film, but I think that they both share this idea of storytelling and creativity. So again, if there's a specific area within film that you're interested in, then it gets a little bit more detailed and there's different roles and such. But I think that in generally speaking, there's this idea of storytelling that I hope I'm answering your question. Okay, but yeah, I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that.
Anybody else want to add?
Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
And then you've got a question from Bradley Cannon. How do you deal with microaggressions in the workplace? So this has a little bit to do with those barriers that we were talking about earlier. But as we know, microaggressions are called that not because they're not majorly affecting us, but really because people can brush them off, right? As being like, I didn't mean it, and that's not, you're taking it all wrong. And, so how do you deal with microaggressions in the workplace?
This isn't my idea. This is something that I borrowed from a woman who I work with. Her name is Mariah Polingit. She's also an AU grad. And I don't think she talks about this publicly and on panels and stuff, so I don't think she would mind me sharing, but kind of keeping the thing with microaggressions, it's difficult because it's like, what's wrong. You can talk to your friend and you're like, yeah, that was definitely messed up. It can be really hard to say that to someone, in HR, to an editor, to a manager, whatever the structure in your workplace is. It can be hard to kind of convey sometimes how harmful that is. And so something that I've heard that some journalists do is keep kind of like a running list of it. And it's not like a hit list or anything like that. It's just to keep a list of these incidents to show that, number one, it's a pattern. Number two, I'm not crazy. Like, this thing actually is happening over and over again. And then if you do choose to take that up a step and to show that to someone who could help you get out of that situation, you have a record of it. And you can kind of use it in however way you want to. And sometimes it's just good to write it down, and it's a way to vent and to kind of deal with it in the moment. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to deal with microaggressions, just because everyone is different. Some people are more confrontational, some people are less confrontational, and I think it's kind of up to you to deal with it. But it is good to have that record, because depending on how you're feeling, you can either use it to express yourself and kind of get rid of that frustration, or you can use it as a record to help your own case and to have that if you do choose to talk to someone else about it.
It's such great advice. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kex.
Oh, no problem. I will touch on that as well, because I've actually dealt with that microaggressions in the workplace, and I was that person who, I like to say, professionally blunt, of course, staying professional, but confronting those situations. And I'm not going to mention the name of the organization or anything, but just keeping it generic. But I did deal with that, and I did keep a running list. It got to the point where, even if sometimes you confront a situation, unfortunately, nothing comes out of that. And so documenting something, however, you feel is the way you could keep track of things, as Lauren said, so that not like you're trying to like have revenge or something, or, be like, to show that you're not crazy, but, just to have a record of that. And if you decide to report it to HR, in my case, it did go that far. Unfortunately, sometimes, even on that level, when there are people who are from diverse backgrounds, who are already there, I guess, they don't see through the situation and don't hear your voice. Unfortunately, that happens sometimes. And so, at that point, you can decide what you do there. But I definitely agree that, or just speaking for myself, the way that I have dealt with microaggressions is to confront the situation and be professional about it, but keep track of it and stand up for yourself, and not to, be pushed over or anything like that, but definitely make sure that your voice is heard and not be afraid to speak up.
Great. Yeah, I think I would add to that. I think it's so important to keep track of it, because what you heard, right? And kind of what it means. But in addition, I think that sometimes asking kind of a clarifying question can hopefully trigger a light bulb in the person who committed the microaggression, right? Like, well, what made you ask me that? Or, where is that question coming from? That kind of thing. So, for example, if somebody would ask me, where are you from? It would be like, well, what makes you ask me that? Or I'm American, so it can be awkward. It can be a little bit like you're playing, you're being a little, what's the word? Coquettish, I guess, but it's not really about that. It's just, getting them to realize what they've said. And that can be a little tricky. And as Lauren said, I think it really depends on your personal style and what you're comfortable with. And also the recognition that for all of us, being people of color, there's this worry of how we come off, right? Like when we respond to something like that, and that we then fear getting labeled in a way that we don't want to be labeled. So that's a tough one. Does anybody else want to comment? Because I think that's such an important one, and it's something that we all grapple with.
I agree with the approach of that Professor Doshi mentioned. I mean, because sometimes in this world, I mean, some people, have led very sheltered lives. So sometimes people say things and really don't know that it's offensive. So I think it's important, again, depending on your approach and how bold you are, to kind of take people aside to the side of sometimes and say, hey, what you just said there, from my perspective and from how I grew up, I took that this way, and I think a lot of other people would as well. So, sometimes, yes, people are, purposely, doing things to, tick you off. But sometimes I think, it's just ignorance, being lack of knowing, not knowing that, asking someone, where are you from, or, saying that you're articulate, you know, it's just sort of, a no-no and kind of offensive and tacky. So, just kind of addressing the person maybe to the side, not in front of anyone, just letting them know that going forward, you may want to not say these things because, from my perspective, this is how, I feel about what you said.
And I agree. I feel as if once you enter the world of journalism, or whether it's the film industry, you're really going to have to advocate for yourself a lot. And whether that comes to your work or just you as a being and a human that deserves respect. So I think definitely sticking up for yourself and saying, oh, look, what did you mean by that? Or nope, that's not my name. Sorry. Even small things, like someone called me the wrong name earlier and I was like, I don't know who you're talking to, but it's just really, really small things. Like that. And it's really important just to advocate for yourself, which is something I wish I had learned more in college. Because I think once you leave college and you're sort of on your own and you're like, oh, you don't like my story idea? All right. Well, but it's kind of like over time you begin to learn how to like advocate for yourself, whether it's your ideas, whether it's just small things like your name or small things across the board. It's just the more you do it, the easier it'll become.
That's great. Thank you. I know there's one more question in the chat, but I did want to come back to some specific questions because you all have such great career paths, and I wanted to ask some specific questions of you all. So going to Kex, and I'm going to sort of make this a two-part question. So first, was there anything in your experience at AU or in college in general that you would pick out as kind of being really significant or important in your career development, or something that you wish that you had done? And then the second part of that has to do with your work right now. So you recently had a PSA nominated for creating a profound discourse around suicide prevention, and you've produced a short film on domestic violence. Why do you think these are issues that are important to highlight in the media, and what do you hope to focus on in the future?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of the question, when I was at AU, some of the things that I did that has benefited me down the road and where I am now is I would say the internship that I had, and then I did ATV. So the internship that I had was with NBC4 WRC, which is right across the street from AU. And that's kind of where everything began for me, was right there at AU in college. So I was an intern in their advertising and promotions department. And they really treated their interns like employees. It was a paid internship. You were there it was like 3 times a week, but you were there in all the meetings and everything. And because of that internship, I still keep in touch with those people today. And down the road, like my CW job, for example, I got that job because of that internship experience and the people that worked there. And then to answer and the other thing was ATV. So that's something I did at AU, the ATV organization. I was an editor. That was kind of like a foundation that I got in terms of how that whole world of putting together a show works. And yeah, and it's interesting to see how all of those colleagues that I had on that show, to see where they are today, it's also a networking thing too. And that's kind of falling into what I wish I had done more of in college, is to network and to just get out there. And even though, if you're a freshman, if you're a senior, if you're sophomore, junior, just to start networking when you're in college, I think it's definitely very beneficial down the road. And not to be afraid to ask questions, like even in your classes. And there's no such thing as a dumb question. I used to always think, oh, is this question going to be dumb? Like, just ask it. So that's something that I think I wish I would have done more of in college. And to touch on the PSA nomination, so I think that issues like suicide prevention and domestic violence, like the short film that I did, I think it's important to highlight those type of issues in film and media. I think it goes back to the point I made earlier about media being so powerful and being very influential. Just to touch on the PSA a little bit, that was filmed at a high school, Poolesville in Maryland, Poolesville High School. And apparently in that school and in that area, there's a high percentage of suicide rates amongst teenagers. And so, in that pre-production process, I met with the students there who were part of their suicide prevention organization at the school. It's kind of like a focus group study. And just through all of those conversations and seeing how when the PSAs were produced and then the feedback that was given from the teachers there or the staff at the school who were part of this suicide prevention organization and how it was impacting students, it just shows how powerful that media is. And so compelling students to be the one, which the name of the campaign was, to be the one to help their friends who are dealing with suicide to be able to come out of that. And so same deal with the domestic violence short film. Something, since we're on this topic of diversity as well, I think in the media it's been portrayed that it only kind of happens in like African American communities or like Hispanic communities, domestic violence. But just from all the research that I was doing for that film and discovering that this happens, like it can happen to anybody. And there's people I know that were going through it, and so that is kind of why I did that film. And then when it did come out, and just how impactful it was for people, and people just coming up after the premiere and saying I was a victim, and people on the cast and crew who had dealt with that, it just really opened my eyes at how powerful film and storytelling is, and media in general. So yeah, definitely I'm all about impactful stories with film and my career in that. And currently I'm in pre-production for a short film that's touching on the Japanese American incarceration in this country. And I particularly wanted to focus on the African American community as well during that time, and how they were standing alongside the Japanese American community in solidarity. And especially, being half African American and half Japanese, it's definitely a passion project for me. So yeah, learning a lot there. And we tend to, not we, but let me rephrase that. I think that with history, certain topics like this are not talked about enough. It wasn't just the Japanese Americans that were incarcerated, it was also Germans and Italians in this country. So I think that using media and film as a tool to raise awareness, continue these conversations is important.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's fascinating to see sort of the intersectionality of a lot of these topics that you're working on. Let me move on to Lauren. So Lauren, you're the higher education reporter at the Post. So obviously there's been a huge focus in the last year or so looking at institutional racism in higher ed in particular. So how have you seen this story evolve in the time that you've been on this beat? And I know you were with the Post prior to your graduation as well. So can you speak a little bit about that? And also the same question that I gave to Kex around your AU experience and what was really meaningful and important, and what you had done, what you wish you had done more of.
Okay, I think I can try to answer both those questions in one answer, because I think my experience at AU working for the Black print kind of influenced the way I've covered colleges and universities. So, when Jenna and I were running the Black print, it was at a time when AU was really not in a great spot. It was kind of like racist incident after racist incident. It was kind of ridiculous, just the frequency at which these things were happening. And so that's kind of how we came into, or at least I came into journalism, really started taking journalism serious through that experience, because I'm like, these things are happening, they're very important. I don't see anyone who looks like me or who looks like Jenna talking about it. So, we were kind of there and covering that stuff. And that was also really great practice in holding universities accountable. Universities are, I like to think of them as kind of like big corporations. I mean, they have big budgets, and the way that they operate is really, really complex. And it can be hard to get straight, clear answers from universities when something bad happens, or when you are trying to hold systems accountable. It can be hard to get straight answers, and I really was able to practice that at AU, learning what questions to ask, and kind of understanding when I'm getting the runaround, when someone's not trying to be straight with me. And I think now that I am doing that full time, not just AU, but other universities. I had that experience at AU, and I'm a lot more, I think, more sophisticated in the questions I ask, and especially questions around diversity and racism, because these incidents are still happening. I can kind of use that experience that I had firsthand with the Black print and inform the questions I ask university presidents now. And something that I joke with other higher education reporters, because, you know, this isn't just AU, it's a lot of other universities, but sometimes a lot of times something bad happens, there's always a task force. We know that task forces are kind of like a nice solution, and, you know, it's a good solution in the present, but we kind of see that task forces in their different iterations kind of do the same thing over and over again, and then nothing really happens. So we kind of joke like, okay, that's a code that we need to ask different questions, and we need to figure out, okay, well, what are you going to do right now? Because people are really hurting on your campus. So I think those experiences my experiences at AU have really helped me and my job right now. And then in terms of things that I would have done differently at AU, I think maybe taking journalism seriously sooner. I came in actually as a journalism major, and I was really afraid that there wouldn't be any jobs and it would just be really difficult. Not to say that it hasn't been the case, but I really discouraged myself and talked myself out of following something that I was truly passionate about. And I think a lot of people right now in school have that concern, because if you look at the media industry, like, it's not like, I mean, it's not jobs falling out of the sky. I mean, it is kind of difficult, but if it's something that you're really passionate about and it's something that you really want to pursue, like, don't doubt yourself, don't discourage, don't talk yourself out of doing something if you know that's really what you want to do. Just take it seriously. There's a lot of professional journalists who would be happy to talk to you. There's mentors you can find in professors, and you know, don't worry about the end so much. Like, the job will be there for you, and just kind of focus right now on your craft and honing it, and worry about the rest later.
Thank you. Matt, I see you popping up on the screen. Is it time for us to go to breakout rooms? I know we have more questions in the chat, but maybe people that have asked questions in the chat can join the individual panelists in breakout rooms.